Welcome to immigrationquestion.com, your go-to resource for U.S. immigration insights. We provide clear immigration news and information. Our platform provides a network of licensed attorneys who can answer your questions and guide you through the process. From visas to green cards, asylums to citizenships, immigrationquestion.com helps you to network with immigration attorneys so that you can move forward with confidence. Sign up today or download the app. Free registration, limited time offer. Stay tuned. We go live in 30 seconds.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar edition hosted by immigrationquestion.com, a networking platform where immigrants, families, advocates, and licensed immigration attorneys come together to better understand U.S. immigration policies and procedures. My name is GB Satusa, and I will be your host for today's important discussion. What makes a strong asylum claim under current immigration standards? Now, seeking asylum is a significant form of protection available under U.S. immigration law. For individuals fleeing persecution, the asylum process offers an opportunity to present their case and explain why returning to their home country is not an option. Now, at the same time, asylum and asylum applications are evaluated under specific legal standards that require careful preparation and credible supporting evidence. No two asylum claims are the same. The facts behind each claim, the available evidence, and the applicant's testimony all play an important role in how a case is reviewed. Now, knowing what immigration authorities look for can provide valuable perspective for individuals considering asylum or those already in the process. To help us break this down, we're honored to be joined by attorney Vilerka Solange Bilbao. She focuses on immigration law and the protection of immigrant rights. Attorney Bilbao has represented immigrants in federal court proceedings, provided extensive pro bono legal services to families, and actively supports the immigration legal community through her leadership within the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Attorney Bilbao, thank you so much for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you for this webinar edition.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about asylum.
Before we begin, a quick reminder to our audience. ImmigrationQuestion.com is a public educational and networking platform. The information shared today is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute individualized legal advice. If you're joining us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or any other platform, welcome. Please subscribe and share this session with anyone who may benefit from learning more about asylum and the legal standards that apply to these cases. Let's dive right in. Attorney Bilbao, what are the basic legal requirements an applicant must meet to qualify for asylum in the United States?
Yes, so this is a loaded question because basic doesn't mean that it's very little or that it's simple. Okay, asylum is a very complicated process. So it depends. First of all, you have to be inside the United States to be able to request asylum. You cannot be at a port of entry or at a border. You have to be physically inside the United States. And there are basically two ways in which you can apply. If you are in immigration courts already, you can use it as a defense to the charges that are being brought against you to say, okay, despite what happened, I need protection, and this is why I'm asking for it. Or if you're not in immigration court, then you would apply directly with USCIS, which is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services Office. The form to apply is actually slightly different depending on where you are. It is the same number. It's an I-589, and you file for it online with the USCIS app, or not app, or website that they have. You can create a username if you're filing with USCIS, but if you're filing with the court, then you have to print out the form and fill it out and send it into the court. There is a requirement that you file within the first year. However, there are some exceptions to that requirement. including changes in circumstances or your country of origin, that, you know, maybe there wasn't a war and now there is an active war in my country while I was here on my tourist visa. And so that makes it the reason why I need to go back now, or need to have protection from going back. Now, that those are sort of like where you file and filing requirements. You usually will have to attach a copy of your entire passport with that initial filing. And there is now an $100 or $102 filing fee that needs to be paid annually. So you would pay it at the time of filing, but then also before that year expires, you need to make sure that you are submitting your new fee. If you do not submit the new fee, even if they don't notify you about it, it's possible that the government terminates your application and says you've abandoned it. So those are sort of like the basic requirements in terms of where to file, you know, what form you need. Now, what qualifies you for asylum is something else. So technically, asylum is for a person who is unable or unwilling to return to their home country. And this is due to persecution or fear that you're going to be persecuted if you go back. And the reason for those fears have to be specific. It has to be because of your race, your religion, your nationality, your political opinion, or membership in a group. And there's a definition for what those groups mean, right? Something historically that the government has recognized is that gender. So maybe because I'm a woman in this country, I'm being persecuted, or maybe because I'm a minor child, right? Maybe I'm being persecuted. But there are, you are able to show if you're in a particular group. And so that means that category is relatively just open and broad sometimes. Now, the persecution that you receive has to be a harm that's relatively severe. So they're going to look at exactly what happened. And it does need to be by a government actor. That is very important. If it is not a government actor, then there's another standard that you have to prove, which is someone that the government is unwilling to control or unable to control. Sometimes for some countries, it has been maybe a rival army that's present in that country. Or at some points, we were doing asylums for people who had been maybe harmed by cartels or by private criminal groups in that country. But it is a red flag, and those are harder to win because really the standard, it's supposed to come from government, who is the one harming you. Now, the person who's applying is the person who is responsible to meet all of these things. So you need to have evidence of the harm that you received. And then you need to have evidence that it was because of those particular reasons. We call them protected grounds. And so it becomes really difficult because most people don't flee a country if they're fleeing with a bag of evidence of everything that happened to them. Usually people, all they have is their story, their declaration. And then from there, you start requesting documents from back home to try and prove some of the things. I always tell families, you weren't walking around with a camera 24 hours a day recording everything that was happening. So you won't have proof of everything, but there's things that we can prove. We can prove probably where you lived, where you worked. When did this happen? Were there any witnesses who saw it? Did you go to the doctor, right? Did you have any injuries that you photographed at some point? So there's lots of things that you can prove. You don't need to think about only proving the harm, because the government is usually not documenting and giving you, hey, this is all the bad stuff we did to you, right? So people have to be creative about what are things that I can use to prove. And then the other part of that is that it is also your burden as an applicant to show the government that this is happening in your country, right? So some people, some countries, it's impossible to request asylum because the conditions of the government harming people are not there, right? Like you might think, can I request asylum from Italy? Well, likely not. There have been no reports of Italian police and military sort of beating up people, for example, because they said, I'm from an opposition party. So the country conditions are also something that you have to prove. This is actually happening in my country. This is the way that police treat them. And you do also have to prove that there is nowhere else that you can be safe in your country.
Yeah.
So for countries that are India, China, Brazil, countries, Mexico, that you can go and move to 15 hours away and no one would know, it's extremely harder to prove those things. So that's legally what qualifies you in the world of asylum. And it's very important to not self-diagnose whether you are eligible or not. That is one question that I would ask an attorney. Tell your story as much as you can. Take it to an attorney and say, am I eligible to apply for this? Do it as soon as you get to the United States, because if you don't meet that 1-year deadline, you can apply for other things, but it is harder to win an asylum. Sometimes it's doable, but it's so fact specific. We try to get people to apply before their first year. So JB, I'm sorry. That was my simple answer on asylum. It's just so much.
No. So, Attorney, you touched on evidence. What would you say are the types of evidence that are most helpful in supporting an asylum claim?
So the first one is going to be your declaration, your telling of the story of what happened. You are permitted to submit a written declaration about your story as long as you want it. Now, you do not want to give them an 800-page book that has a whole bunch of things that are irrelevant to what you need to legally prove, because it's likely that your officer won't finish reading it or that your judge will get bored halfway through and they don't pay attention. So it's important to focus on the things that we just talked about, the persecution that you suffered, who did it, how often did it happen, why was it happening, what did they tell you, how do you know that's why? Have you tried to flee somewhere else? You want your declaration to sort of answer all of the questions for the officer or for the judge, whoever you're in front of. And you want it to be 100% truthful. So you're not making up dates just to put a date on there. If you don't know the date, be clear. I don't know. I believe this was in the month of February 2021, right? That's okay. You can estimate, but do not, because it is a sworn statement, and your credibility, whether the judge or the officer believes you, is half of the battle, right? So if you start inventing things, if you start putting things that are just way too much, or also that you maybe may not remember in 2 or 3 years when you get interrogated about this, keep it out. So a declaration is your most important evidence. There are some people who submit only the form with basically a paragraph about what your persecution is. But then that means that during the interview, your interview is going to be more difficult, because the officer is going to have to try and almost ask you a million questions and pull out information, because you only gave them a paragraph. So the more information you give them is important. Now, country condition reports, newspaper reports about things that are similar happening in your country and in your city are very, very useful. If there are any news reports about what happened to you in particular, that's gold, right? If you have police reports, hospital records, where you worked, if you were part of the military, those records, anything that you can do to show the officer, look, this was really me. I really lived this story that I'm telling you, because look, this is where I worked. This is where I graduated. This is where I lived with my family and my children. This is why we had to move. Look at what happened. That makes it really easy to corroborate, which is your responsibility. Not only what you're saying, but give me some documents to make me believe that what you're saying really happened. Because a lot of the stories from asylum seekers, you have to think that they look and sound bizarre to some American adjudicators or judges. In the United States, people are accustomed to calling 911 and the police being here in 5 minutes. And when that doesn't happen in your town or in the city that you were living in, or when the police are actually the ones who do all these harmful things to you, it makes them question whether these stories are real. So all of these different articles and newspapers, and now we have the internet so you can search. It gives the judge and the adjudicator confidence that what you're telling them is true, saying, okay, this is so different in another country. I understand what you're telling me. So I think that's really good. The only other thing that I would mention here on sort of medical, psychological evaluations are really important. Sometimes the harm that happens to asylum seekers is mental. Okay, so it's an invisible harm. Asylum was created at the end of World War II, or at least codified and made into law by more than 200 nations and the United States, because of what happened to the Jewish people who were kicked out of their countries and their cities. When they arrived at a new country, they would just say, I don't know what to do with you. I can't give you paperwork. You're not a citizen of this country. So it led to the massacre of millions of people. And as a nation and world, we sort of came together and made this law. But a lot of what was happening is that the Jewish people were not being allowed to practice their religion, right? Their persecution was religious. And so that persecution isn't always physical. Like they were being kicked out of their homes, that part is physical. But even if you lived in a city where nothing physical had happened to you yet, and you couldn't practice your religion freely, those are invisible harms. So a psychological report sometimes might show that when it has to do with some types of persecution, including political persecution, or you can't express the reality of what you want because you'll be harmed. So that is always a really, really good one for asylum seekers to submit. Not everyone can afford that, right? But if you have the ability to, there's lots of really good psychologists all over the US that write reports for immigration and help you tell your story as well, because they'll interview you in depth. So I would say those are my main portions. But there is more types of evidence that you can submit to the court. Really, you have an open book of what you can submit. You just want to make sure that it's relevant and that you're not confusing the officer with everything that you're sending them, that it's clear and organized.
Weighted or even available?
Yeah, so that happens often. So, for example, Venezuela just has a terrible earthquake. Let's say that you were a Venezuelan national who had records at a hospital. You can prove that maybe that hospital is no longer there. There's no way I can get those records. So you might write a letter specific about that. Hey, I tried to get records, Judge, about this because I know that I went to that clinic, but this clinic is no longer standing either because it was bombed or because of the earthquake. And here's an article that shows it. So that sort of excuses you from that evidence. You won't have that for everything, right? But that's one way to deal with evidence that's not available. It just has to be based on your particular situation. You do want to show the judge that you tried to obtain the evidence and couldn't, especially if it's evidence that's available. So, for example, if you have a witness, so a friend or a colleague who saw what happened to you, they should help you write a letter, right? They should write a letter saying, hey, I was there when this happened on this date. I saw when the government did this to my friend, and whatever it is that your facts are, and try and have them sign it and notarize it. If they're in a country where maybe notarizing it might be problematic, right? It might get them in trouble. They might write that in the letter. Hey, I am not notarizing this. Here's a copy of my ID, but I'm not doing it because I can also go to jail if this happens, or this can also have an effect on me. Witnesses, you want to try and make them available to testify as well. So sometimes there's no documentary evidence, but you have another person who lived it. If they can write a letter and then also be available via Zoom or WebEx for your trial date, that will help a lot. judges usually will not take the evidence of witnesses, but having them there and having a letter makes them understand that this is being backed up, right? They want to hear from you mainly, but this is one way. So I think the other thing is not waiting for the last minute, because a lot of people have limited evidence because they haven't tried to get these documents and they are doing it the last 2 months of their case. Whereas if you already applied for your I-589, that is the time to start gathering your evidence, because you may be called for interview in 6 months, but you can also be called in 5 years. And if you have a hearing in 5 years, there's no way the judge is gonna accept you asking for more time, or I didn't have this because I didn't ask for it. Well, you had 5 years to ask for this. You had 5 years to get me medical reports, to get me psychological reports, to show me, right? And so I always say it's kind of like a school professor. If they give you a lot of time for the project, they're going to expect more. So sort of take that into account, but try, right? Not just say it doesn't exist. Well, here's why it doesn't exist. And the ones that you don't have, can I have a witness? Do I have somebody who lived that? Even if they didn't live all of it with you, maybe they were your parents and they were the ones who picked you up at the jail after the government finally released you of 2 months in detention, right? And they saw the bruises that you had and they saw that it took 3 months to get better. Write a letter from them, because that would help a lot always in the cases.
Now, Attorney, you spoke about the 1 year filing deadline. How important is the 1 year filing deadline, and what exceptions may be available?
It is very important. But if you didn't meet the 1 year filing deadline, you still have other asylum related cases that you may qualify for. Okay. So it doesn't mean that if you didn't meet it, don't apply. You may still get some protection, but it's harder. So if you apply within the 1 year, there's no question that you are eligible to petition for asylum. And if you win that route, then you have protection for the rest of your life with asylum. You have a protection where we will not deport you back to your country unless you commit a very violent crime where we revoke that asylum, but that's very rare. Okay. So it is a lifelong protection from deporting you to that country where you faced harm. It also gives you the ability in 1 year to apply for a green card. And then after you get your green card, 5 years later, you can apply to become a citizen. So it has a pathway for you to stay permanently in the United States. If, though, you miss the 1 year filing deadline, you may be eligible for something called withholding of removal, which is you show to us that the harm exists, but for right now, we're not going to deport you. When situation in your country changes, we will remove you. You don't have that pathway to get a green card, and you don't have that pathway to get citizenship. And then you can also be eligible for something called CAT, the Convention Against Torture. In that one, you basically prove that you have been tortured or likely to be tortured in your country if you go back. And so we'll also say, okay, we're not going to deport you because torture is pretty bad. We don't want to participate in that. But as soon as the conditions in your country change, we will send you back. So you also don't have a pathway to a green card. And so it's a big deal, because if you miss that filing deadline, even by 1 day, you may be facing still removal to your country in future years. Now, there are exceptions, and usually the exceptions have to do with changes in law, changes in the political situation that now put you in danger. A good example recently is in Nicaragua. There was a government that recently took over. That government started persecuting Christians. And so priests have been arrested. People can't go to church. So let's say that you were here in the United States already. You didn't have a valid asylum claim or you have been here for more than the year. Somehow that changes and you know that you're a practicing Christian. You might say, well, now things changed and I can't go back because I won't be able to practice my religion. However, you only have 6 months to file. You don't get a new year just because things change. So you do have an accelerated time frame. So that's an excuse. Another legal excuse that sometimes is valid is showing that you were basically unable to. You've been hospitalized for 8 months. You didn't have capacity. Maybe you were a minor. So as a minor, you didn't have control of what your parents did. But once the situation changes, you will only have that limited 6 months. So it's very hard to win missing the 1 year filing deadline. So you don't want to do it if you can avoid it. But if you do have that situation, talk to an attorney right away, because we screen for that and we ask lots of questions. The one that I have with that was late filed was filed 10 years later, had a lot of medical documents and medical issues. So it's possible to do it. It's not impossible, but it just makes things harder.
Yeah, yeah. Now, attorney, how are current processing delays or even backlogs affecting asylum cases?
Oh, I sort of used to like the asylum backlog, to be honest with you, because it provided some protection for families. What's happening now is that the government is not necessarily processing old cases, but new cases are being processed in an accelerated time frame. So if you're filing now, you should expect with USCIS to get your biometrics within about a month, and then your interview with the asylum officer within the 5 or 6 month mark. And that's good in a way because you have almost immediate information about whether or not you can stay in the country. But if you are not prepared, those 5 or 6 months happen really, really quickly. And so a lot of people will lose their asylum case because they haven't prepared it. They only have those 6 months to do it. When you lose at the asylum office, you get transferred to immigration court where you have a second bite at the apple. You will have likely 2 hearings, the first one before the judge. They will give you a schedule of when you need to submit the evidence, and then you will get your individual hearing, which is your final trial on your asylum. The dates are important because you need to resubmit all the evidence to the judge. So even if you submitted it in the first step, they don't have access. You resubmit everything, and then you can also supplement. You can also add any additional reports if something new has happened, if you've gathered more evidence in that time frame. The court used to also have a backlog, so we would see trials maybe in 2 to 3 years, giving people the ability to hire an attorney and sort of do everything with time. Now we're seeing that trials are sometimes even placed 3 months after the person is in court. So they are moving very quickly, okay? And that cuts the person's time frame to be able to really file. The judge is the last time that most people will have to really submit any evidence for asylum. So it's very important that they don't miss those dates. Now, the people who are on the backlog, who have older cases, we are seeing also, because of the way the immigration court is being moved, where hearings from 2028 are being passed forward and advancing dates. So just because you have a hearing super late into the future, that doesn't protect you. You should be working on your case and having it ready, even if not submitted yet, but having it ready. And then we're also seeing a lot of people who get detained. All of those cases are also being accelerated. So because we have an increase in detention, those cases are sort of moving faster. And when they move at that speed, we're looking at a lot of denials. That's just really what's happening. About 5% of asylums at a nationwide level are being approved. So it's very, very small amount of cases. So it's happening faster. I liked the slower pace because it gave people time to prepare. So, it's just the reality. We don't know how long it'll be like this.
Yeah. Now, Attorney, what final guidance would you offer applicants seeking to build a strong asylum claim under the current immigration standards?
Yeah, so understanding that asylum law is changing every single day. So what may be a strong case today that you filed might actually be a very weak case in a year when you might have your final trial, and understanding that. For example, in Venezuela, the United States recently picked up the president of Venezuela, and he's in jail here. They're arguing that Venezuela has dramatically changed. And so if you have a Venezuelan asylum, If your trial is in a year and Venezuela is now a democratic nation again, that might change, right? So understanding that there's variability, it doesn't mean don't apply. If you really are afraid to go back, if you really have faced persecution and harm from your government for any of those reasons that we discussed, and you should probably discuss it with an attorney in depth to see if you're eligible. If you really have those things, I would apply, but understand that it might not always give you the protection that you need. Sometimes all you're doing really is buying time in the United States. If you get something favorable, then you can stay. And then if not, you should also work on your plan B. So I think that that's really good for asylum seekers to understand, because some believe that just because this happened to you, you're entitled to asylum and you're going to get it. And with the low percentage of people getting approved, it's just not the reality for most people. Another big thing is knowing that the judge's decision is not final. So you are able to appeal this to 2 levels in the government. So you would appeal first to the Board of Immigration Appeals. They also have a new accelerated timeline. They're trying to do cases under 6 months. We'll see how that happens. That's a change in the last month. And then if you lose at the BIA level, you can go to your circuit, which is your federal sort of district in the United States, and you can appeal there. So you do have time after you lose an asylum case with a judge to sort of get your life together and fight the case still. But as you go up, it's harder to win. And if you don't prepare your case really well at the bottom level, it's very hard to win an appeal on the top. So working with a professional, making sure that you are never lying. In asylum, a lot of people think, well, if I just exaggerate this a little bit, maybe they'll give it to me. If I say that this happened, don't lie. It will make you ineligible for every immigration benefit in the future if they catch you lying. So it's not worth the risk at all. And I think the other part is preparing and organizing your case really, really well. There are people who can do this on their own, who will have folders and tabs and will have everything really nicely. If you know that you're not that, hire somebody to help you. And the more complex your case is, the more legal help you're going to want, especially if you're trying to stay in the United States full time, or for more time. But it really is, to me, I really see it as something a little bit sad, because a lot of the people who need help just can't afford it. It's the reality. It's an expensive process. I would also say, look at all other options. A lot of people think asylum is the only thing I can apply for, but maybe you're a professional in your country and you could get a visa because of your career, or because of you're a teacher, or you were a nurse in your country. A lot of times there are pathways that you can also explore, but you have to do that early, as soon as you get here. If you wait too long, sometimes asylum becomes the only thing you can apply for. So as soon as you get here, if you are trying to stay, contact an attorney and screen out what you can actually do. Because if this is your only route, I understand it. But a lot of people have several routes that they can do that are much easier than this and much less traumatic, right? And so it's a beautiful type of law on paper, but in practice, not everyone wins it at the end. And so people need to have other plans.
Yeah. Thank you so much for those insights, Attorney Bilbao. It's been a truly informative and interesting session so far. For everyone watching, today's conversation is intended to provide practical information about asylum and the legal standards that apply to these cases. Now, every asylum application is reviewed on its own facts and supporting evidence. Now, making careful preparation and credible testimony especially is important. Access to reliable information can help applicants better understand the process and the issues that may arise. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. ImmigrationQuestion.com is a networking platform where users can ask immigration-related questions at no cost and engage with participating attorneys. We are also proud to share that ImmigrationQuestion.com is BBB accredited and ISO certified. This reflects our commitment to transparency, accountability, community education, and security. Now, Attorney Bilbao, based on your experience, how does a platform like immigrationquestion.com help immigrants and immigration attorneys like yourself?
Yeah, I think it helps twofold because if people are informed about the options that they have, they know when to seek help and when it's something that they can do themselves. I personally think that the immigration system should be one that's accessible to the normal person, that they should be able to fill out most of their forms. USCIS tries to do that with a lot of things, but immigration is sort of like a whole bunch of band aids on top of each
Yeah.
other, of laws, of programs, of this. And so it gets really complicated to sometimes figure out what am I even eligible for. And so these conversations are really good because people can start learning about the different types of processes and then also know when do I need expert help? Like maybe I'm able to do this, but when do I turn it over to someone who can really help me? When is it worth it to invest more in this or not? Because sometimes the conversations with clients are, hey, we're never going to win this. You don't have a chance at this. Why are we even applying? Right? Let's look for another option. And so these conversations are great. I love chatting with you guys always at Immigration Question.
Thank you so much for those thoughts, Attorney. Now, before we move into our live Q&A, let's tackle this important question. What are some common misconceptions about asylum that you believe applicants should clarify before pursuing an asylum claim?
I think a misconception is that I have to say this or else I'm not going to win. Almost like there's a key magic phrase that I can say to win an asylum. And it's where a lot of fraud happens and a lot of just fake asylums happen. You want to be truthful about what your story is and what you lived, and don't add any fluff. Because there is no magic phrase that will get you asylum. It is a combination of your entire profile, of what you lived in your past, who you are now, what you've done when you get here, because they do look at that. We didn't even touch that, but that's the discretion part of asylum. Well, if you came in here and in your first 3 years, you've gotten 5 felony convictions, there's no way I'm going to give you asylum, right? So it is a combination of who you are as a person. And I think that people almost like say, well, just put this because that'll get my case approved. You have to prove it at the end to be able to win it. And you never want to be caught lying to the US government on any immigration, because that will disqualify you, especially within the asylum context, from ever receiving any other benefit, right? So I think that would be my biggest thing. Just make sure you're being truthful. And if your case is not that great, it's good to know that so that you can start finding options.
Yeah. If you've just joined us, we've been speaking with immigration attorney Vilerka Solange Bilbao on what makes a strong asylum claim under current immigration standards. We are now moving to our live Q&A session. This is your opportunity to ask general questions and hear educational insight from an immigration attorney. Please drop those questions in the chat or call us live at 516-703-3483, and we'll take as many questions as time permits. Right, the first question from Carlos is, do I need police reports or medical records to prove what happened to me?
So you don't need them, but if you have them, it's preferable. Medical records are great whenever you've had an injury and then you go somewhere, because the medical records will document the extent of those injuries, and maybe, what kind of treatment you had to have, how severe it was. Police reports are not always required. It really depends on your circumstances, but if you do have them, they are going to be helpful because it shows that you went to get help from police, but it's not always required. So for example, it really depends. I've also done police reports after the fact. So we have sometimes people who have recently fled, and we contact the local police there and say, hey, we want to put a denouncement or a report about this that happened, and they will file it, and that way then we have it. But not every police department will actually do that. They also do their own internal investigations, and sometimes doing that also puts other people who are back home at risk. So it's something that you want to discuss. So it's none of this is needed, but if you have it, it will absolutely help.
All right. Farah is asking, what makes USCIS or the immigration judge believe that an asylum story is true?
So it's a combination of things. I always use this example. If I tell the judge that I am afraid of going back to Dominican Republic, which is where my family is born, because of the giant spaghetti monster who lives under the bed is going to harm me, the judge is going to say, well, this is not a basis for asylum, and this person might need some psychiatric help because, as far as we know, that doesn't exist, right? So your story has to be the truth. It has to be believable. When people make up an asylum story, they tend to make up one or two or three things. And so when they are being interrogated by the government, it becomes very clear that they're making things up as they go. Because part of the interview is they will ask you a question and then they will ask you 1,000 questions about that. So think about if I ask you, okay, well, what happened at the protest? The police beat me up. Okay. So how did you know they were police? Who else was there? Where was the protest? When was the protest? Who else went with you? Why were you protesting? What was the other side? When did the police arrive? How did they do this? I can ask you 1,000 questions about that. When people make something up, they will only make sort of like the basics of the story. When you lived it, we can talk about it for hours because you lived that situation. So it's very clear in your interrogation, if it's with a judge, or in your interview with the USCIS asylum officer, whether it's truthful or not. The other thing is, how much do you corroborate? So how much can you show the judge about that? You may not be able to show the judge the exact moment where an officer hit you during the protests, but there might have been reports from 15 different news outlets about what happened that day to people. And you can show that you were there. And maybe you can show that you lived 2 blocks away from it because that was the address that you had, right? So you won't be able to show everything, but you can show details around it that give the judge confidence that what you're saying is true. And it's a very particular determination that the judge makes and that the officer makes. It's called credibility. So if you said something in writing and then the news report says something different and then your story says something very contradicting, then that makes the judge, clear that someone's lying here, something doesn't add up. So making sure that all of your details are straight. And with people who have been harmed, this is where the psychological evaluation helps. Sometimes we have memory issues, okay? Depending on the harm that you actually survived, you may have psychological issues that might explain why you don't remember sometimes all of the details. So it's important to work with a physician or a psychologist to also understand, because when you're giving testimony, when you're being interrogated by a judge and by an immigration officer, it can be very intimidating, and you might forget sometimes, but you don't forget all the details of the harm, right? And so that doesn't destroy your case necessarily if you messed up on a year or if you messed up on a day, but the judges can clearly tell. They've been trained to do this. Attorneys too, right? That's why we ask so much questions and we ask it multiple times. We're trying to make sure that we get the accurate answer. And that's how you basically understand the credibility. Like, do they believe that this happened to me or not? And sometimes all those asking of all those details of questions is where it goes. It clearly shows.
Yeah. All right. Priya is asking, can I still win my asylum case if I forget some details during my interview?
You can, but it really depends on the details, and it really depends on your situation. Um, the officers and the judges will always instruct you, if you don't remember, don't make something up, right? We don't want you to make something up. We want you to tell us. But it's sometimes, if they ask you your phone number from 20 years ago, it's impossible to remember that. And some people might remember it because they've dialed it 5 million times, but some people won't remember it. So it doesn't always destroy your case, but you want to be honest, right? Sometimes I've heard clients testify, and I'm very proud of their answers. The judge might say, how did you know that these were police officers? Well, judge, they came dressed this way. I don't remember if it was 3 or if it was 4, if it was 5 officers, but there was a group of them and they were dressed like this. And then they came in the cop car. Even though the judge, you might have not given the exact number, right? The exact detail. You are telling the judge what you remember from the situation. The other thing is, it's very clear to judges when you are closed and when you are open and sharing. And so this happens very naturally, just as humans, psychologically. Someone might ask you a question and you might close up and you don't want to answer. Well, I don't know. I don't remember. It clearly shows the person is sort of offensive or hiding something, versus judge, I'll be clear. I don't actually remember what happened here, but I do remember this, and this, right? Like, so being open to continue to answer questions rather than closing up and being defensive is another way that even if you forget the details, it's not going to destroy your case.
All right. Thank you to everyone who joined us for today's webinar edition. And thank you, Attorney Bilbao, for sharing your knowledge and practical guidance with us today.
Yes, thank you. It was a great pleasure to be here and to talk, and I hope to be back soon.
We'd love to have you back. Everyone else, you can always visit immigrationquestion.com to ask immigration-related questions, stay updated on those policy updates, and register for upcoming live events. If you missed any part of today's important discussion with Attorney Bilbao, the replay will be available on Spotify soon. Just search Borderless Talk by immigrationquestion.com. We look forward to seeing you on Wednesday at our next live session. Until then, stay informed, stay prepared, and stay connected. Bye-bye.